causing problems.
I am.
There she is.
Hey, Tara. How are you? Oh, good. I didn't see you on the screen. I was just making sure you're ready.
Hi, everyone. Sorry
Hi,
I'm late.
Tanya. I like how you're like, how are you? Hi, Tanya.
Hi there.
Okay, we can get started. Welcome to this workshop of the Hopkins School Board. We have a nice full agenda this evening for our 2 hours together before our meeting begins at 7 p.m. So our first agenda item is budgeting. This comes on the heels of a clean audit report that we received at our last meeting on December 7th. If you want to watch the video of that, and it was really helpful to begin our budgeting conversations that way with an understanding of how we ended out the past fiscal year. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Mary Perry-Reed.
Thank you, Chair Bouchard, and good evening, board members, colleagues, community members, and everyone listening in. I'm going to introduce our Director of Business Services to the virtual table. As our chair mentioned, we did have a really great audit report that we presented to the board and community members last week. And it is budgeting season, and so our goal is to provide frequent updates to the board and to our community members just to keep everyone fully informed of our progress. So we'll start with this evening with just a brief budgeting update. Tariro?
Thank you, Dr. Reed. Good evening, Chair Bouchard. Good evening, respective board members, colleagues, and the community at large. So what I'm going to do here is to actually do a brief presentation. I'm not going to concentrate more on the numbers today, but the framework of what we are looking for is being moved into fiscal year 23. One, with some of the low-hanging fruits we can actually capitalize on, as well as some of the anticipated outlooks as far as the predictable staffing model and what we are trying to enhance, with the hope that we'll be meeting with the Citizen Financial Advisory Committee this week, and will bring back a framework in the budget parameters for fiscal year 2023 back to the board sometime in mid-January. So just give me a second here so that I can pull up my screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so what I decided to do is to put a couple slides here together. One starting with some of the mindsets we are looking at as far as our budget is concerned. So the first piece of information I have, as you can see on the screen.
Somebody's unmuted.
Okay, I think somebody was not muted on there. So my philosophy is based on the strategy on what I defined how we spend our money is our strategy, meaning how we spend our money as a district is our strategy. And actually, I adapted this from a public budgeting system book, and it says budgeting is the manifestation of an organization's strategies. Whether those strategies are the result of thoughtful strategic planning processes, of the inertia of long years of doing approximately the same things, or of the competing political forces within the organization bargaining for shares of resources. And again, I know in the last few years as a district, we've been moving very fast in addressing structural changes within our budget. And again, I want this to be clear to the community as well as our incoming board members. Again, starting in fiscal year 20, we did some changes to the structure of our budget when we started to see a shift in our revenue and expenditures, mostly looking at how our expenditures were starting to overrun our revenue. And we started with a quick address to that by doing a reduction within our supplies. We ended up having to reduce the use of our P cards. And this culminated into the following year, which was this fiscal year we have, where we actually started on the predictable staffing model. So that being said, this is the strategy we have from one, making sure that our revenue and our expenditures are structurally balanced. Um, One of the things is a district, how we get revenue is most of you know is we get revenue through enrollment. We also get revenue through other categorical means, which are tied to our application for benefits, which is our free and reduced. And I know that slide you see right now is very loud with different charts on there. The first chart just showing you where we are with our free and reduced lunches. Our free and reduced lunch is actually going down. Right now, we are about 5% down from the previous year. And this does have some context in the sense that our some of our categorical dollars, meaning compensatory dollars, are driven out of the free and reduced lunches. Some of our federal grants, mostly concentrating on title dollars, are also determined by our free and reduced lunches. So if our free and reduced lunches applications start to going down, that means that's a reduction to our revenue. We've been working with our principals and our building leaders to make sure that we are making follow-ups with families. And as far as families filling up that application, since it does have a great impact, one to the resource allocations coming into the building. Now that we are considering and we are moving towards a fixed process where the dollars are following the students into those buildings. I just wanted to put this up in context. Also, have seen a slight increase within our enrollment numbers, especially the kindergarten level. So those components are actually making our budget, a little bit different than what we've seen in the last 2 years. One, due to some of the shift we've seen with the pandemic and some of the slight decreases we've seen with just families making different choices and decisions on whether they need their students to be uh, uh, in person or preferring to be online. So from the enrollment perspective, we actually go to our to our revenues. Where does the money come from for the district? Our revenues are actually divided into a number of sources. The majority of our revenue comes from state sources. So currently, based on uh, current information, about 58% of our resources are coming from state sources. 34% coming from local sources, meaning property taxes and other local and county grants we receive. 6% come from federal sources, meaning we are getting revenues from the federal government through grants, title grants, Perkins grants. Currently, the ESA dollars are also ballparked into that percentage. And we have other sources, sales and other conversions, which accounts for 2% of our resources. So once those dollars channeled into the system, we allocate them, and we allocate them to actually fund different programs. So the next slide actually just shows our expenditures by program. The majority of our expenditures are actually going directly into the elementary and secondary regular instruction, followed by special education instructions, followed by our community education and services, instructional support services, site buildings and equipment, district support services, vocational education instruction, people support services, as well as fiscal and other fixed cost programs within the buildings. One of the things we actually discussed last week when we were talking about the audit was how the district is spending some of these revenues. So I did put a chart together here just to show you in comparison to the 7-count metro area and how much Hopkins Public School is spending. And as you can tell from that chart, when you look at our regular instruction, that's where we're spending most of our dollars. So in total, the district spends about $19,514 per student, compared to about $16,653 across other school districts of similar size within the metro areas. Again, if you look at the numbers, you can see that most of our resources are actually hitting direct into our buildings. So we did change the model on how resources are being allocated into our system, starting with the school allocation model. So previously, our allocation model has been more focused on a centralized model, where the district was making a lot of the decisions as far as the FTEs and the purchases and all other components within what supports a building. We started moving to a decentralized model, which is the model we started this current year, where we are actually allocating dollars into the building, starting with the predictable staffing model, which is the base model we use on what resources do we need for a building to open. And then on top of that, we started opening channels of giving autonomy to buildings and building leaders to be able to make decisions through the allocation of some of the discretionary dollars, which will be prioritized by the building as they make all those different decisions. So the model you see right now, it's a kind of 3 separate different models. And where we are in the middle, where our resources are now decentralized, and most of the decisions are being made at the local level with input from building leaders and their staff. We still have a lot of work to do in this area as we try to refine how that communication works within buildings and how our scholars and staff can participate in the budget framework and how those resources are allocated. So when we started looking at the revenue-based budget model, our goal is always to base everything on the revenue. The revenue drives how the expenses are being implemented in the buildings, not the other way around. This makes us align our budget's allocation process to support and advance the Vision 2031 strategic goals. The revenue-based budget model recognizes that different results require a different design. It promotes interdisciplinary and collaborative learning, research and outreach that further Hopkins Public Schools culture of collaboration and cooperation. It also makes sure that the district is financially sound and can make the long-term investment required for success. The model also links budget to the programs and results delivered in any programs. It also makes us transparent, consultative, making sure that we understand all parts of the Hopkins community. It recognizes that success in learning, research, and outreach requires strong operational service, support, and world-class facilities. It encourages financial decision-making and entrepreneurship at the local level to align decisions with district strategic goals. This model actually allows us to be equitable and predictable in allocating resources, which also gives us flexibility on the operation and learning leadership plan for the future. It keeps the district financially healthy. It defines clear responsibilities for where different kinds of costs are managed so that decisions are made at the appropriate level. I don't know if someone with their mic on. I'm hearing a lot of feedback. It uses data and metrics that are accurate, easy to understand, and easy to measure for operational and learning units, and provide information and processes that help business units manage their resources, advance their mission and innovation. It is also adaptable to changing circumstances and programs, which minimize the number of special allocations. We are also in the process of developing a district budget conversation forum, which will be hosted by district leadership, open to district employees, students, and the community. And the goal of this forum is to answer questions, gain insight from employees, students, and families, and provide information about budget processes, and finance. Some of the feedback we've been receiving from our building and our department leaders in as far as our current model is concerned, we are revisiting some of those areas, and some of the areas we'll be revisiting as cabinet and district leaders at the building level is the revision of our base allocations, which is the predictable staffing model, what we call PSM version 2.0. So we'll be revisiting different components. We'll be revisiting some of the allocations which were made based on the different ratios we used and different formulas, just making sure that those are aligned with One Vision 2031, as well as what is happening in our buildings. We'll also be looking at our categorical dollars, the discretionary funds. We'll look at compensatory dollars, how they are allocated, achievement in integration plans, how those are tied to Vision 2031, our title dollars, our ADSIS, as well as our capital projects levy. We also have feedback from buildings as far as the allocations with the operational allocations, site instructional materials, supplies, purchase services, how those have been used in the current year, and what we are looking at as we go into fiscal year 23. We'll also look at some of the allocations in as far as our operation costs are concerned, meaning, how we funded printing in the past, how we funded utilities, how we funded, the telecommunication services. So we are doing a holistic look at our expenditures and making sure that those expenditures are aligned with the allocations coming into departments and buildings. We are also looking at revamping our grant processes and how we are receiving other funds, whether it's the Hopkins Educational Foundation or any of the private grants. So those are some of the items we are looking at as we look into fiscal year 23. Like I said at the beginning, we'll be coming back to the board after we meet with the Citizen Financial Advisor Committee on what the parameters look like as we look at our revenue, our enrollment, as well as our anticipated expenditures for fiscal year 23. The next slide is just a snippet of the predictable staffing model as it stands this current year with our current budget. Just like I said in my previous slide, we are definitely going to relook at some of the allocations. We're going to look at some of the ratios we used when we developed this model so that we can refine everything and everything ties to what is happening in our buildings. That's all I have for now. I will actually take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Chapanduka. Questions or comments from my board colleagues?
Chair Bouchard.
Yes, Vice Chair Andreessen.
Hi, Terrero. Thank you for this presentation. I was wondering, could you share it with us so that we can, I wasn't able to see the details on your graphs, which are always illuminating. So if you could do that, it would be very helpful for me. And
Sure.
thank you. And then the second thing, well, the first thing that jumped out at me was, and I wanted some clarification from you to make sure that I understood this correctly. So our free and reduced applications, so our educational benefit application completion rate is down by 5%, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so that directly impacts several funding streams. And just wanted to remind everybody that Hopkins proposed a resolution with MSBA to sever compensatory funding from that application due to, well, there's lots of reasons. We believe that families shouldn't carry the burden of filling out applications so that schools can get the funding that they need. So welcoming our community to advocate for this at the state level. This is something the legislature can do to make it easier for schools to get funding. And then also thinking that there's legislation federally and state, hopefully, that will make it easier for districts like Hopkins to apply for and use the community eligibility provision, which may be something that we want to look into. And then again, we don't have to use, families don't have to carry the burden of applying for those benefits for us. Guess that wasn't so much a question as a statement.
That was great context, and want to thank both you and Director Adams for carrying that resolution forward at the MSBA Delegate Assembly, and it passed, so it will become part of the MSBA advocacy platform. And so, again, if our community would like to get involved in that type of advocacy and advocacy for a whole host of other issues related to public education, a lot of it funding related, we'll be having a presentation at the meeting from our Legislative Action Coalition on our platform here in Hopkins. So that'll happen at our 7 p.m. meeting, and is always really educational and an invitation to participate in this advocacy process. We need all voices, so. Other questions or comments for Director Chapanduka? Director Chapanduka, could you go back to the slide that had the 3 different budgeting models on it, kind of showing our evolution here in Hopkins and how we're moving through this?
Also, board members, Elise is sharing all of the slide decks with you, so maybe look in your email for that.
Thank you.
Okay, this one.
That's the one. I think it's so helpful to visualize, where we started in terms of our budgeting process 2 years ago, where we are now, and then the direction that we're heading. And one of the most compelling kind of aspects of this third model that you brought up in your presentation is the community input forums. We have had community engagement around our budgeting process in the past, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about when those forums will be held, kind of what the framework will be for those, and how they might differ from community engagement we've done around budgeting in the past.
Sure, Chair Bouchard. Again, so we are planning to actually meet with the Citizen Finance Advisory Committee on Thursday morning to start putting the framework of the parameters we'll be bringing to the board. I think from that standpoint, in January, when we meet with the board and the CFAC presents the parameters, that kicks us into actually moving towards making some decisions. At that point in time, I think we'll be bringing in the community. I don't have the specific dates. I still need to meet with cabinet and other leaders to put those dates in place so that we can start planning on how many times do we get community engagement. What we're trying to do is to actually make this a participatory budget. I know we don't have a lot of time, so it will be crunched up, with making decisions at the highest level and making sure that there's enough input, one from the community and from our buildings, and leading us to our first preliminary budget presentation in April to the board.
Wonderful, thank you. So we'll stay tuned and be excited to participate in that process. I think moving towards a more participatory budget model definitely aligns with Vision 2031 and the type of engagement that we're striving to build with our larger community. So really appreciate that approach. Other questions or comments? Well, thank you, Director Chapanduka. This was a really great level set, and we'll look forward to continuing the conversation in January and welcoming our Citizens Financial Advisory Committee to the table as well. Did you have any last words on that agenda item, or should we move? Okay, so we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is holistic student safety. We have leaders from across the district in the call joining us tonight. Thank you so much for being here. And I'll pass it over to Dr. Mary Perry-Reed.
Thank you very much, Chair Bouchard, and I'm going to ask Elise to run the deck for us. Elise, if we can start on slide 5. So I'd like to thank all of the colleagues in the virtual space who will help co-present some information for our board members and community members, parents listening in this evening. We do have a pretty robust presentation for you, so we're hoping, I think, to be done with the presentation itself within about 20-25 minutes. So we'll try to move at a good clip and then see if board members have questions after that. So we're here to talk about holistic school safety, and when we use this term, we do not mean to be evasive or confusing, rather intentional, because holistic refers to something that has separate and distinct parts, but the parts are also interconnected and make up the whole. So when we talk about holistic school safety, we're talking about all aspects of a school and schooling experiences that inform student and staff safety. And I'll just wait a moment for the presentation here. So with us this evening, we have Dave Carlson, Jeff Goldie, two of our principals, Principal Ness from Eisenhower, Principal Romaselli from North. We also have Fonda and Brian, our director and assistant director in special services. So all of these individuals will help with this report this evening. You can go to the next slide, Elise. Okay, so you can see in the slide here the different components of holistic school safety, which include infectious diseases and public health, threat assessment, physical safety, bullying and cyberbullying, cybersecurity, emergency preparedness and planning, mental health, school climate, classroom climate. There are multiple aspects of holistic school safety. And as we think about some of the challenges that are facing our school and classroom environments as we continue to facilitate schooling and in an ongoing pandemic, we are continually challenged to build a proactive and positive and preventative school culture as we navigate and manage student and staff wellness, family and community wellness, because we do have sometimes to manage issues that stem from the community and enter into our schools, all the while building a culture of safe student reporting so that students and staff feel safe reporting something if they see or hear something concerning. So multiple aspects of holistic school safety, which make this a very complex endeavor for all of us. Next slide, Elise. Oh. I think these slides are not in the quite order.
I think we skipped 2 at the beginning.
Okay. Here we go. Okay, so as we get into the presentation, I did want to provide just a brief history of school safety for all of us. So in the late 80s and early 90s, the U.S. documented a rise in violence across the country, which then created a sense of urgency to ensure safety in our nation's schools. During this time, most discipline decisions were made at the school or district level. And then in 1994, the Gun-Free Schools Act was passed, and this was a federal law that mandated that states receiving federal education dollars needed to enact zero tolerance policies. You may remember that term, zero tolerance. I was a principal during that time. These policies required at least a 1-year expulsion for students carrying weapons in schools, and states complied with this, and even more, schools started suspending and expelling students, not just for weapons violations, but for infractions such as drug possession and drug use. And then after the Columbine shooting, that tragedy in 1999, the legislation at the federal and state levels began to focus more on emergency preparedness in schools. So new state requirements had schools coordinating with local law enforcement around emergency preparedness and mandated emergency drills, including lockdowns and active shooter drills. And you'll hear a little bit more detail on this from Jeff Goldie. Since then, however, research on the long-term negative impacts of exclusionary practices, and when we use that term exclusionary practices, we're mostly talking about out of class, in-school suspension, and or out of school suspension and expulsion. So excluding students from classroom learning, from school, right? So the research on the negative impacts, such as suspension and expulsion, encouraged policymakers to work with state education departments and also state departments of human rights to help schools and districts move away from zero tolerance. And it was found that the systematic practice of exclusionary discipline created race-based disparities in districts' suspension and expulsion data. And also the negative impact wasn't just on school data, but also on student learning, student efficacy. So policymakers and school leaders have been looking at new approaches to discipline, including limiting the length of suspensions, reducing or eliminating expulsion, prohibiting preschool and elementary suspension, restorative practices, and considering student circumstance before suspending and expelling. So before COVID hit all of us, schools had addressed student mental health. Schools had been helping students make good social media choices. Schools had been navigating threats of violence. And as we continue, now that we're in an ongoing pandemic, facilitating in-person schooling, schools in Hopkins and really across the nation have seen an increase in need. So the needs are specifically around mental health, not just for students, but also staff, navigating conflict brought on by social media and or members of our community, students engaging in self-harming behaviors or threatening others. And so really, like I said before, the work of our admin teams and our district crisis team is around managing all of these needs while building safe, proactive, positive school cultures where if students and staff see something, they say something. So next slide. So before we introduce other presenters, I did just want to provide a word on school resource officers. I know it's a hot topic. We get a lot of questions about whether or not ending our contract with the Minnetonka Police Department was the right decision. Do we need an SRO in our schools, et cetera, et cetera. So there is mixed research about whether having an SRO helps a school be more safe. And there is growing research that shows a consistent link between the presence of armed officers in schools and distinct discipline patterns. So I want to talk about that research in just a moment. But just for our audience, just some basic information. So an SRO is a school resource officer. They're sworn law enforcement. They're police officers with arrest powers. 91% of school resource officers across the country are armed while present or stationed in schools. Most carry additional restraints, such as handcuffs. The most recent data that I could find was from 2017-18. 45% of schools across the country had SROs. In Minnesota, in 2014, 28% of Minnesota schools had SROs, 50% in the metro, 50% in greater Minnesota. And in Minnesota and across the country, most SROs are stationed in secondary versus elementary schools. So those are just a few data points about SROs. And with the research, the recent research has found that schools where SROs are present see a higher number of suspensions, expulsions, police referrals, and student arrests compared to those without SROs, with the effects 2 times larger at a minimum for Black than for white students. I recently attended a lengthy professional learning with Dr. James Densley. He's a professor at Metro State who has for many years now studied mass shootings, including K-12 school shootings. And he has also worked with a federal agency to create a national database of mass shootings and all of the research that comes along with that study. And he has found that the rate of death as a result of a school shooting is 2.83 times greater in schools with an armed officer present. And of course, when he asked us in the audience, why do you think that is? You know, people had some very puzzled facial expressions, and he explained that school shooters, and 91% of them are known to us, they are either current or former students, they are both homicidal and suicidal. And so their theory is that if they bring a gun to school and attempt a school shooting, that it will be, they will be able to die at the hand of an armed police officer. So as we contemplate the future of holistic school safety in Hopkins, there's a lot for us to consider, including what role our school crisis teams will play, how we will train our staff, because you've seen that holistic school safety is very complex. There are multiple aspects to ensuring student and staff safety. And of course, whether we will employ school resource officers or security officers of some kind, whether they would be armed or unarmed, etc. And I think very importantly, we also need to contemplate how all members of our community can play a role in ensuring holistic safety for our students and staff. So that's just a little bit of a framing. And then I'd like to introduce, I think Mr. Carlson is first. Dave, are you going first with sort of the past and current state of our district crisis team in Hopkins? Welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Dr. Mary Perry Reed and Chairman Bouchard and school board members. So each school has its own site-specific crisis management plan appropriate to the address of their building. To ensure this school safety plan, the principals implement the policies, protocols, and practices discussed in this plan, and work with the assistant principals in operating under a comprehensive plan. I think we went up one more slide. The crisis management plan operates on the incident command system, which was established by the fire service to deal with the different agencies getting together to work on their wildland fires out in California. And it's a good fit for state and federal and county units to operate on this plan on a smaller area or group or a large area. So the principals and the other building equivalents establish the crisis management team at each site and work together with the training to make sure that they're all organized and establish and maintain and organize the steps to meet the demands for the crisis situations. Also, at the district level, the superintendent has a district level crisis management team, which includes a superintendent, assistant superintendent, various cabinet members, directors, and department managers, others identified by the superintendent. The crisis management training builds confidence with proficiency. Staff must be prepared and able to react automatically and appropriately and must respond in an effective and a safe manner to any crisis that comes into play. That's where we are currently with this system. We have found that there are some things that we need to do to try and improve and move forward that deal with the physical and emotional and behavior effects of students and staff. And we need to have some smaller alert teams to handle these situations with that situation.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson.
Thank you.
Mr. Goldie, are you ready for your slide?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I was asked to provide a little contextual history regarding how we conduct drills and training for our crisis management planning and program. We have a state statute, section 121A.035, that mandates our drill pattern. That's 5 fire, which came from the 90s, and then 5 lockdown, which came from the Red Lake school shooting episode around 2005. The statute was amended in 2006. And then 1 tornado drill. So that's where the 551 drill pattern comes from that all schools in the state must drill to. It dominates our drill schedule because we're required to do those 11 drills. And the fire and lockdown drills, if you've been in one of our buildings during a drill, you probably experienced this. They're often paired together. And then we have additional requirements from the State Fire Marshal's Office, which requires us to do the first fire drill within the first 10 days of school. And then we must do 2 more fire drills in the summer for any building that has any sessions or activity involved. And then as a matter of evolution within policy 806 that the school board has, we've added 1 tornado drill during the summer. The reason for that being that the peak tornado threat is the month of June for us, which is when we're ending school, but also standing up for summer programs. We also in that policy ask that schools try to separate minutes to minimize folks automatically moving from one drill response to another without waiting for the prompt. And that we drill no more than 2 pairs of drills in each month so we can spread them out throughout the year. The policy also requests that we enhance 1 drill each year, which is something that Dave works with the teams on in terms of adding a little more realism in response to drills, one of those 11 drills that we do each year. In terms of leveraging these opportunities, what we might want to do is look at our crisis management plan and realize that the 551 drill pattern has us focused on the first 3 of the 5 primary responses: severe weather, evacuation, and lockdown. The other 2 responses, shelter inside and stay in place, rarely ever get drilled unless we enhance a drill to include one of those 2 responses. There are a couple of ways we can approach that. We can continue to try to do that. We can also try to lobby the state legislature to change the drill requirements from the 5-5-1 pattern. And for fully sprinkled buildings in particular, which is Hopkins Public Schools throughout, adopt a 3-3-2 pattern and do 3 fire, 3 lockdown, and 2 severe weather drills. When you look at the data, the most likely occurrence of those large significant impact events is severe weather, not fire. We haven't lost anyone in a school fire in this country in about 60 years. And for lockdown, geographically, our need for lockdown is usually occurring in school districts in the exurbs and far suburbs outside of the Beltway, as opposed to us who are inside the Beltway. The other thing we could do, if we could get that to happen, would be to take the other 3 drills that we have freed up to do and freed ourselves up in terms of bandwidth and resources, and drill shelter inside, drill stay in place, or drill the lesser but more common responses, such as incidents within the building involving assaults, confrontations, etc. The other thing that we can consider doing in terms of drilling and training is adding at least one every year or every other year interactive tabletop exercise for more comprehensive and training practice. This is something that large first responder organizations do on a regular basis. This is something that the military does on a regular basis. The last tabletop exercise I participated in was out at Hennepin County Emergency Management, and it was for a tornado. And we were the only school district there participating in that drill. There were a dozen local first responder or emergency management agencies were involved in that drill, including the municipality of Tuskegee in Alabama. And it was good practice and was good learning for everyone involved.
Are you done, Mr. Goldie?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much for your report. We're going to go to Brian Stanley. He's our Assistant Director in Specialized Services.
Good evening, everyone. I put 3 slides together, and I'll try to streamline as quickly as possible. I was asked to put the slides together as we consider the holistic response when we talk about safety, not only the physical safety, but the psychological well-being or the mental health components that occur that may lead up to a crisis, during a crisis, and after a crisis. So as we think about incorporating or adopting a model that considers those factors, a conceptual framework, I'll be talking about the prepare model, which is actually the last slide, but I wanted to give you some thought parameters as we think about the adoption of that conceptual framework that really takes into consideration the psychological well-being of everyone involved during the different phases of a crisis as well. First and foremost, I just put in there some characteristics of crisis. I mean, just the concept of crisis, of course, conjures up a lot of negative terms and emotional distress that we need to be thoughtful of, both in our planning and in our response, as well as in our recovery phases as well of our response to a crisis. And then obviously there's multiple variables that you need to consider in terms of the types of crisis, the length of the crisis that happens, as well as the intensity. And of course, all of us have different responses and a range of reactions to those crisis situations. And we need to be able to assess those individual or classroom or community type of reactions and align our response in consideration of those. I think it's also important as we think about the psychological preparation that we need to do for crisis situations. We also need to understand the level of response, because in a crisis, if you underreact, you can further the trauma or the impact of it, as well as if you overreact to a crisis situation, you can also provide a perception that the situation is more unsafe than it really is too. So that levels of school crisis response just really talks about once you move from that minimal where we all can remain in our traditional roles, and once it moves to the building or a higher level, we're all stepping outside of our traditional roles and assuming crisis response management lenses that we need to apply. And all of us have that responsibility, not just for the physical safety, but the psychological safety and well-being as well. And then the components of any comprehensive crisis response, obviously both in the preparation needs to consider about how do we increase the resiliency factors and the ability of all individuals to cope if and when a crisis does happen, and how can we help support and mobilize our systems to make sure that we can bring individuals back into that place of psychological or mental health well-being as well. And then those 5 factors down there or components: prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery. Any adoption of a conceptual framework should incorporate those components, because those are what the U.S. Department of Ed identifies as the phases of crisis planning or management. Sometimes we only think about crisis as in the immediate, the response, and the recovery, but there's other factors that go into activities to ensure that we're prepared, both prevention and protection. Next slide. So once again, those, as we thought about the PREPARE model, which of course is an acronym, and we'll go over that on the 3rd slide. Once again, the U.S. Department of Ed has given us kind of the parameters or the phases that we need to be thoughtful of as far as the crisis preparedness of our schools as well. I won't spend too much time on this one, but as far as the prevention, this is the work that we're doing as far as promoting resiliency, incorporating SEL, social emotional learning components into our school day. But it also is some of the work that our school counselors, social workers, psychologists do as far as conducting risk assessments or threat assessments when we hear of concerning issues that arise during the course of a school day as well. The protection obviously is just what we've done throughout our environment. It could be as simple as cameras, but I wanted to focus in on the PREPARE model. Really talks about engaging and developing meaningful relationships with our students. And creating trusted adults. Mitigation, obviously, if a crisis does happen, what can we do to ensure that we minimize or reduce the potential of additional psychological harm or impact on mental health? And that can be from a systems perspective, but it can be from an individual student response specific service as well. And then in that response, obviously, we're trying to stabilize the situation from emergency situation, making sure people are first and foremost physically secure and safe, but we also then need to address the perception of safety as well as identifying and assessing and evaluating or almost triaging in that response who is psychologically been impacted by the situation. So then we can move, and then once we do that, then we can move into those recovery stages of the crisis response, which obviously is restoring our learning environment. And that can be done, both from a systems perspective, but through that we may triage as well and look at what is our overall school culture need at that time, what's the next level of psychoeducational restorative circles, but then also moving into where I spend a lot of my time on, what are the mental health individual needs and supports that need to happen for those students that maybe had the mental health crisis or were impacted by the crisis and are now exhibiting certain risk factors or warning signs associated with that specific incident moving forward. Last slide, please. So the PREPARE model is, like I said, a conceptual framework that it kind of lays over our safety or our crisis response and applies that psychological lens or that psychological well-being lens in all different stages of the crisis, from preparing all the way to the recovery component. And it was developed by the National Association of School Psychologists. And like I said, it's based on the U.S. Department of Health. It incorporates Homeland Security. It also brings in other think tanks around trauma specific to children. And this is their third rendition. They're on their third curriculum. And the PREPARE stands for the Prevent, Reaffirm, Evaluate, Provide, and Respond are kind of in connection with one another, and then the exam of how the system did. So prevent and prepare for crisis. Once again, this is any of our PBIS. It is any anti-bullying. It is second step, things that we're doing to help provide a foundation to our students to promote their resiliency or their coping skills if in case a crisis does happen. Reaffirm, this is our assessment of the situation to making sure everyone's physically safe, but then also addressing what are the perceptions around safety that stem from the situation that specific to that crisis situation. And then once that, if a crisis does happen, evaluating the psychological trauma risk. So this is, once again, conducting and assessing kind of a triage perspective. And when we look at that, we have to factor in, what type of crisis we're dealing with, the duration, the intensity of it, any other warning sign or risk factors that may come out of those evaluations. And then once again, provide those interventions, which can be school-based or broad across the entire community, can be focused on a specific classroom or individual needs. And that's when it gets into that respond component of addressing and responding to the mental health needs that arise from the crisis. And finally, the responsibility of the crisis team to examine the effectiveness of the overall response. Where are the gaps, what worked well, what system components need to be adjusted or adapted to make sure that we're readily prepared for an event similar to that, to ensure that we're systematic in our response and as most effective as possible.
Thanks very much.
That's all I have.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Stanley. Ms. Contreras, we're going to transition to you, please.
Okay. Thank you. So this last part kind of brings it all together. So I believe Dave Carlson kind of mentioned who kind of the team members would be at each site. And then Jeff talked about a lot of the traditional drills that we have had. Prior to COVID, we had, I think 2 years prior to COVID, we trained social workers and counselors on the Columbia, which is a suicide risk assessment. And now we're bridging to kind of add in additional training, such as the Prepare model, as well as what do we do when it's not related to mental health, and such as some of the recent events that have happened in our secondaries, where it requires multiple teams responding. And so we want to be able to respond to all types of crises events, whether it's natural, an individual student, or if it's groups of students. And so how this can come about is ongoing trainings. There's some Prepare trainings that will get us to be comprehensively trained in the ways that we need to be able to address all things. Give or take with the current teams, a member or two might not be involved depending on the situation, but for the most part, we've established the same members at each site. And now next steps are kind of doing the trainings, making sure our protocols are standardized and that we're doing them the same across the board, doing debriefs so that we learn once we've had the situations occur, that we can learn as we're having the situations, and then a notification system. And that just means if something's happening at a site, who gets notified and when. And so identifying those components too, so that our communication is tight and timely.
Thank you so much, Director Contreras. So board members and community members, we've talked about the history of school safety. We've talked about our framework that we'd like to use, the Prepare framework, as we transition from where we've been to address the complexity that we are facing now. And at this point, I'd like to introduce to you our school leaders who can really give you a sense of the work on the ground in our schools. So our principal Ness from Eisenhower and Principal Aromaselli, just to give you an example of how this work is managed at an elementary level and then at the secondary level. So Principal Ness, would you like to go first?
Yes, thank you. And so the preventative work that we are doing at Eisenhower Elementary, I have listed here. We last year got a HEF grant for feelings check-in boards for all of our classrooms. And so this is part of that holistic mental health support. All of our students are able to check in on a feelings board every single day when they walk into their classroom. One of the components of the feelings check-in board is I need a check-in. And so they can put their name on any of the feelings. So there's happy, calm, angry, sad, and then one of them is I need a check-in. And so the teacher knows then right away that they could use some additional support before the day even begins. And that's some real preventative work that we are doing at Eisenhower. If the teacher checks in with that student and decides, you know, this could use an additional level of support, maybe from our guidance counselor or our social worker, the teacher notifies our student support team. And every morning we have our student support team members available until 10:30 a.m. to do those individual check-ins with students. Another thing that we do every classroom, every day, has a morning meeting or a community circle. And that is for every student every day. That is a community building piece to our day that is really important and a big piece of relationship building in our school. And also one thing that we have changed in our structure this year is to have teachers supervise recess. That allows for more supervision on the playground and lots of opportunity for community building and relationship building with classrooms. We also have a crisis management team, and during a crisis, we are in constant communication via walkie-talkies. Depending on the context of the crisis, we know who and when to contact people based on their relationship with the student. We really take that into account. And so we did have an example this year of a student that was in crisis, and we immediately notified the people that were closest to that student to work with that student, because we know relationship matters and students respond best to people that they are in relationship with. We were also able to secure the physical area and make sure that safety was the #1 priority. We did use what Dave Carlson mentioned as the incident and command model with our walkie-talkies. And then afterwards, the site recovery. So we did after that specific example of that crisis, we did develop a procedure for recovery. One was a debrief at the site level with our crisis management team. And then we did the same thing with district crisis management team. And there we were able to debrief and discuss anything that needed to be changed or things that we could have done better in the moment. And then for our students, we were able to make sure that the Monday following, all the students had restorative circles in their classrooms. And we were able to check in with any student that needed extra support individually. And those were either self-identified students, students that their teacher recommended, or family and parent recommendations. And so we created a structure where all of the students went on a spreadsheet, and then we checked in individually. We had a safe space of healing set up in the gym all day long with multiple supports from many schools, and that's how we were able to check in with all of our students that were impacted. because of the supports that were able to come in from other schools and the structure that we had put in place.
Thank you so much, Principal Ness, and thank you for your leadership, um, your constant and steady leadership throughout this pandemic, and for your students and staff. And appreciate your time this evening. And next, we'll introduce Principal Aromaseli at North to give us a secondary example of what the preventative and crisis management work looks like on the ground. Principal Aromaseli.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, board members and community members. Yeah, so this slide, when we were asked to do it, in putting some thought into it, everything that Dr. Mary Perry Reed said at the beginning, with the idea of taking a holistic view of the work we have to do, really got me to thinking. We'll go to the next slide. I want to start off by just covering, I have a little bit of feedback, Mr. There's this, okay. So as a community, as a secondary group, we work with our counselors, social workers, our team leaders, who are our teacher leaders, to really build a sense of community and from the ground up. And we understand the idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is that for kids to truly acquire self-actualization, which is our goal as an educational institution, kids have to feel safe. They have to feel safe physically, emotionally, mentally, in all the ways that they need to feel affirmed in order for them to be prepared to learn. And as a secondary group, we realize that that is our work. We also realize that at the bottom of this pyramid, and the things that come in terms of just needs, whether it's safety at home or at school, these are not things that we as a school can do by ourselves. So we really value the relationship that we are able to establish with families at home to give us that base to build the self-actualization that we need for scholars to have when they are here in our secondary buildings. Next slide. Something that, as a part of that base, our district as a whole already feels a lot of these needs for us, giving us something to work off of. Through COVID, there has been just so much conversations that have been had about what is the need for scholars, what are their true needs, right? Understanding that COVID has created such a disruption in the lives of many of our scholars, their families, and how they show up in our buildings on a daily basis. And so our schools, like many other school districts as well, has really, gone in to wrap its arms around our families and the kids. From the free meals, right? Conversations around school start time, transportation adjustments for scholars and being flexible in how we support them getting to school, mental health investments that are being made at the secondary level and supports that are being provided. And then, of course, our restorative practices emphasis that we've really taken on in the last couple of years. These are the things that we have been doing at the secondary level that has really set a base for this hierarchy of needs for scholars in order for them to reach the self-actualization that we all strive for as a community. Next slide, please. In terms of a school-wide approach at the secondary level, our counselors at the beginning of the year do conduct a scholar needs questionnaire to speak. And that lets our counselors know exactly what the needs of our kids are that are coming in after a long summer, or during the fall, or maybe over winter break as we are heading into one. And based on the responses from this questionnaire, we are able to create groups around managing stress, building friendships, or potentially dealing with grief and loss that kids often deal with in silence. So this is a very proactive way for us to get ahead of things, as these things often will manifest into other things that show up in ways that could make buildings or areas in the buildings unsafe. School-wide preventative measures, we as a staff do have grade level class meetings, which means our entire seventh, eighth, and ninth grade scholars are brought into large spaces, and we have general understanding and expectations shared out with all of our scholars, so that when there are conversations with one-on-one adults or in smaller groups, they're able to connect those expectations to something that was shared as a whole. And we also have grade level approaches to learning, which is an academic approach in setting expectations for what learning in the classroom looks like, because classrooms also have to be made safe, and there has to be an understanding what a good learning environment looks and feels like. And we have to help scholars understand that when they are with us. And of course, we have our advisory curriculums that we all execute at all three levels, all three secondary buildings. And they include often our circle activities. Here in particular at North, there is a circle activity every Monday in advisory, and there's a SEL, which is our social emotional learning activity on Thursdays. And these circles and SEL lessons allow us to be more targeted in dealing with conversations that are relevant to the moment, and allow us to pivot when needed to deal with situations that are happening at large in the community that we believe may impact our building positively or negatively, to make sure it's addressed. It also lets our scholars know that we are watching, we are looking out for them, and we are not ignoring. And this allows us to build trust and confidence with our scholars as well as their families, because oftentimes after these meetings, they often go back home and have conversations with parents, with their own parents around what was discussed at school, creating a transparency that exists between our building and families. We do, all three secondary buildings do have scholar support teams, which is for example, our scholar assistant team, which is our SAT, looking at academic data and how that's impacting scholars and how they're showing up. Our multi-tier systems of support, we have positive behavior intervention plans in place. We have attendance teams, teacher grade level meetings. These are all things that are standardized across secondary buildings to make sure that we are meeting the needs, whether behaviorally or academically. Scholars are being looked after, and no one is being allowed to slip through the cracks. Next slide. When we do have a major incident in our building, we take a human-centered approach to fixing and intervening, right? And it begins with us examining the situation thoroughly, looking at having conversations, listening, and dialoguing to build understanding around the situation. We also examine our current environment and systems of management that we currently have in place and we are attempting to execute as it relates to this specific situation. And after that examination and deep dive, we then have to make a decision on reestablishing or reinforcing the purpose of this of our systems and how it impacted the incident at hand. And so we also have to make sure in doing so that we ensure that our system that we put in place, that this ensure system purpose is connected to a human purpose, because ultimately our kids, we are trying to build healthy young people and help them, get to a point where they are able to know who they are in a confident way and exhibit that in a safe and healthy manner. And so we have to make sure that systems we put in place is right for them, not just arbitrary, but relevant to their experience as human beings and as young scholars in our system. We also then will communicate the changes to our stakeholders, our parents, our families. And then no matter what the plan we put in place, we're always aware that plans can and may need to change. So we remain agile for adjustments and change for future situations, as situations may vary depending on the needs of scholars or the change in community issues or building concerns that may come up for various reasons. Next slide, please. So with all of that, we realize that our influence as educators is derived from our partnership with our families. So nothing can truly be made successful within our buildings unless we have buy-in from families. And I know at the secondary level, we've made that a priority to be in connection and in community with our families through conversations, through collective meetings, whether as counselors, social workers, individual teachers. We've really found a way successfully, I might add, to transcend the idea of this divide that COVID has created, but to create a more human experience. And we find it has reaped a lot of positive rewards for our 3 secondary buildings. We make sure we are establishing connections with we ask families to please make sure they're establishing connections with teachers, counselors, administrators. We want to make sure we always keep in lines of communication open, and help us to create effective behavior intervention plans for scholars if and when they are needed. We also are very careful to make sure we are communicating our expectations from the school for families at home, so that there are follow-up conversations that are occurring at home to reinforce things and safety plans that we come up with here in the building. Next slide. So to wrap it up, this, as Dr. Mirapuri said, this is a holistic approach to building safety, and it's not something that as school leaders we do in isolation. We do it as a part of a greater whole, and that greater whole is our community, our colleagues, and all of those who are invested in the growth and maturation of our scholars. And we are delighted, obviously, to be on this journey. And recently, with COVID, it has been tough, but we are better together. And this is something I've shared with our staff, and I am thankful that I am here with you all today. And we are making this conversation a priority as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Principal Aromaselli, and thank you, team, for all of us working together to provide a presentation on holistic school safety for our board and all community members who are listening in now or may check out the presentation at a later time. Really appreciate your thoughtfulness and just working together as a collective. I also want to thank a member of our audience, Chris Carr, for being here. He's been a thought partner for us in the past, and we appreciate you being here and continuing to be a thought partner for us. Hopefully you heard from our school leaders and other colleagues that we are leading with relationships in our schools, and we are working on improving the ability and agility of our systems to manage the complexity of what holistic school safety truly is. So thanks for your listening. I did say it was going to be 20 or 25 minutes. Clearly it was not. So thank you for your listening patience. And we do have a couple of additional workshop items, but we are also happy to take any questions that board members may have at this time.
Go for it.
I'll just be really quick. I have, of course, tons of questions, but one of the things that I think I appreciated the most was that the focus on relationships, because that was something that was brought up by a staff member who is at the high school, but also kind of the layered and tiered approach that you have. And I kept thinking as I was listening to the response and the plans that are in place and the things that the schools are doing to be proactive and to mitigate. The question that kept coming up to me is, do you have the resources, particularly right now, as we know schools are stretched not only with dollars and people, but just with energy and capacity psychologically to do these really thoughtful, holistic approaches. And on top of that, is there something that we can do as community members, as parents, as school board members, to make sure that you do have the resources you need?
It's a great question, Vice Chair Andreessen. I believe that our most precious resource is time. We do not have the time to provide the quality and rigor of training that we want to provide all of our school-based teams and all of us who are on the district-wide team. So we do have, I think that we're in a spot where we have the fiscal resources, where we do have 3 to 4 individuals with deep expertise in multiple aspects of school safety. It wouldn't hurt to have a couple of additional experts in-house, but I think our biggest issue is time.
Thank you.
I had a question. Of course, our scholars are extremely important, and of course, they come first and they matter. And I really echo what Shannon was saying, that, I appreciate this presentation and the thoughtfulness that went into it. But for example, I wanted to ask, if I'm a staff member and I don't feel safe because of particular issues with students, repetitive issues, what would be my next steps?
It's a good question, Director Khan. I would encourage, and hopefully our school leaders have the quality of relationships with their staff, where staff can go to a school leader and say, I am challenged to feel safe, in this specific space or at this specific time or engaged in this specific assignment or duty, to really get specific about, what the issue is and what's contributing to that experience. And then we would go from there. It's very circumstantial, it's very individual, person to person. So we definitely want to start with a conversation with the school leader, and then that school leader needs additional, support around providing support to the staff member. Then there are plenty of us who can partner with school leaders to do that work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Director
Chair Bouchard,
Adams.
yes,
Yeah.
thank you. I guess I'm wondering what the criteria is for a crisis. We heard a lot of discussion today about crisis. And I'm just wondering if like 2 kids getting into a fight at the high school, would that be considered a crisis? Or does it have to be multiple students, or what rises to the level of crisis?
Well, that's a really good question. So, I think there could be multiple examples of what a crisis might be. A crisis could be isolated to a classroom, and maybe it's just 2 students, but because of the volatility of the situation or the behaviors that are demonstrated by just those 2 students, it creates such a disturbance in the classroom that suddenly 25 or 30 students are impacted, whether directly or, indirectly. A crisis could be in a wing of a school where there's a disturbance, whether it's just a single student who is having a mental health challenge and really needs a lot of adult support, but students who are witnessing and maybe experiencing, confusion or sadness or, just distress by witnessing what's happening with that student, then that could be a crisis. It really depends on sort of the who, sometimes how many, whether directly involved or how many might be witnessing, and then the number of adults that it takes to work with the students and de-escalate and manage, and also manage in layers, right? Brian, is there anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, I think, that's what I tried to capture in my thought parameters as far as the levels of school crisis response, where it could be a student who may be in crisis as due to a recent family separation, right? That can constitute a crisis for a student, but that would allow our school social worker, counselor, school psychologist to remain in their traditional roles. So I think crisis can be defined by that individual's perceptions of the situation or their reality that they're dealing with. So I think it's not so much about what constitutes a crisis, but one, the perceptions, and then two, what is the level of crisis response? What does that require? What level is it? A traditional role? Is it building? Is it district wide? What is the response that needs to happen? And people understand what role they're in. Are they maintaining a traditional role that they assume every day outside of a crisis, or are they having to move into a role that indicates that they are now in a crisis management response, particular to that situation?
Do we measure crises? I mean, how many of crises have occurred at each school this year? Do we know that?
It's a good question. We actually attempted to do exactly that following the end of first term. And so for most of our schools, so there were a number of factors that we looked at to say, well, how many sizable crises have we had district-wide? And most schools hadn't, but, a few had one. A couple had more than one, right? So it really depends on kind of like we were just talking through that a crisis comes in various forms. So I would say, and it's a good question, because how could we present this data to our school board and our community in a way that that could help our community understand exactly what our schools are managing without, infringing on any data privacy laws or practices. But for the most part, yes, so we know that our high school has had 5 to 6 pretty serious disturbances, right? At our secondary schools, there have been a small handful. And then I think in our elementary, we're in mostly good shape, but there are often individual or groups of students who do need significant support. But we wouldn't want to paint the picture that, there's a crisis happening in a school once a week, right? That's not the case either.
Well, I'm just wondering, it's interesting, this whole framework is very interesting to me, and you need to determine whether or not it's working. And you have to have some way to measure it compared to the previous state. So I'm just wondering how we're measuring our success or lack of success using this framework. So
it's a great question. I think that's something that we can discuss as a team. I don't know that we could compare to prior years because this is an unprecedented year, but we could look at, well, what does success look like in managing a crisis or recovering from a crisis, and then, can we critique the degree to which we're able to hit those success points? And there have been many, crises or student conflicts that have been managed and de-escalated before they reached that, those extra heightened levels as well.
Good. Well, I served briefly, for a couple of years on the 287 board. And unfortunately, the way they measure crises is police calls, so they did implement a new structure and found the level of police calls went down. I would hate to think that we've got to go to that extreme to measure the success or failure of a current framework. But it'd be nice to have something that we could refer to as a measurement that says it's working or it's not working.
I agree with that, Director Adams. I think that's important too, as part of communication also with families and the community. I also think along the lines of communication, one of the things that I've been hearing from students around this issue is the role of social media and just how impactful that is
Yes.
on all of these levels that we were talking about for their mental health, their relationships at school, and then also as it goes out into the broader community. I think it's really important that that be a part of any crisis management or mitigation measures. Definitely the kind of assessment and I didn't write down the prepare words, but the evaluation and those kinds of things. Social media is huge. And these kids, my own kids included, spent their lives moved to online. They lived for 2 years in the virtual world, and that is where a lot of this starts and continues and is perpetuated. So,
Agreed.
Chair Bouchard.
Yes, Director Cool.
I'll make this very brief, but, one of the things that I think is very important to point out is over the last 2 weeks, I have received several phone calls from parents and then had an opportunity to speak to several students as well. And I would say that all of them are feeling improvement at the high school, as we talked a little bit about last week, where even our student board reps were experiencing a better situation and a better learning environment. But one question that I do have on that is when Dave Carlson was reviewing his slide, he had mentioned the smaller alert teams. And one of the big pieces I'm wondering is some of the de-escalation that I know has taken place over the last week where you've been able to reduce situations from really turning into a crisis. Have those been because of the smaller alert teams? Or how is that being utilized?
Yeah, I think particularly at the high school, we have a team that's been clearly identified and works more cohesively, more effectively as a unit to respond quickly and de-escalate in effective ways. And also the work that the team and other staff are doing proactively with students, as well as, in response with students and families is all, these are all contributing factors to some of these situations being managed more effectively.
Thank you.
So as we close out this agenda item, I just wanted to name the role of policy in this conversation. And, we have talked a lot about this as a board. We're certainly aware that some of our board level policies, I'm thinking specifically of our student conduct policy, does not necessarily align with the restorative approaches that you all described tonight during the presentation, and that we know that our staff is working really hard to implement district-wide. And so we've already been working on this. We've embedded this into our board goal number 3, and those board goals are published on the school board page on the district website. So you can take a look at some of the specific policies that our policy and monitoring committee has been working on, because we know that there is some tension and discord between these board level policies that we've had for a long time, that many of them were shaped by this historical context that Dr. Mary Perry Reed gave, around exclusionary discipline, and that we've reformed these policies over time, but they need to take a jump into where we are now, and this work that we're doing to be more holistic in our approach. So did want to name that before we close out. We do have 2 more agenda items, hoping to give folks a tiny break before the meeting. So we are going to move on. Wanted to thank our entire team of presenters this evening. This was really helpful. The conversation doesn't end here, but this was a really great level set so that we can move this conversation forward. Thank you. I'll turn it back to Dr. Mary Perry Reed for our elementary professional learning days conversation.
Thank you, Chair Bouchard. Okay, so hopefully we can do this one rather quickly. So we have a proposal for our school board members, and then we have detailed it also in the consent agenda if we have a successful discussion here during the workshop. So we have, as you know, elementary late starts, which usually are between 6 and 9 school days during the year where elementary school starts between 2 and 3 hours later than usual. And what our proposal is to turn 3 of the remaining late start Thursdays into full day professional learning days for our staff. So on the left-hand side of the slide, you see January 13, March 10, and May 5 are 3 late start Thursdays, and then each of the subsequent, each Friday listed on the right-hand side is the day after each of the Thursdays. So Friday, January 14, March 11, May 6. What we'd like to do is replace the late start Thursdays with full day professional learning Fridays on the dates mentioned. The rationale for this is Vice Chair Andreessen, asked about whether or not we have what we need to provide training and support for staff, and I talked about time. We're in a situation now where our elementary educators are working very, very hard on all of the relationship building and instructional improvement, instructional transformation work. And we simply do not have enough time for our elementary educators to feel that they are engaged in effective collaboration and planning. So I asked all of the school leaders to detail the professional learning needs per school for each set of staff. And as you can see, all of these professional learning needs align with our system goals around restorative practices, preparing for effective multi-age instruction, inquiry-based learning. Catalyst training is a training for educators to engage in relationship-based classroom management. So you can see the professional learning needs on the left. And then, of course, we do have grade level reconfiguration, which is scheduled to take place 20 months from now. But to prepare for that, we do want to build in time during this school year for our elementary leaders and educators to prepare for that. So here are some additional details to help you understand this proposal. This only affects our elementary schools. We will still exceed our minimum instructional minutes. So we've done the math, and we're really nowhere near the buffer. In fact, we will still be at about 50 hours over the state minimum for elementary hours of instruction. We will give our students and their families opt-in options to access full-day in-person supervision and learning enrichment. So right now, during a late start, families will sign up if they would like to bring their send their children in the morning, and those enrichment activities and supervision are provided by Kids and Co staff. On these days, we would also identify paraprofessionals who can partner with Kids and Co staff and provide those services. There is a cost, of course, but we want to work with any of our low-income families or, low-income and school-dependent families. And then I just wanted our board members to know that there are other districts that are also really looking at their school year calendar for this year and really trying to acknowledge the high levels of stress, professional learning needed, mental wellness needs of staff, and making adjustments to school calendars to provide extra days, either for professional learning for staff wellness, so we're hoping that our board members could see that as long as we have an option for students and families to opt in to a full day supervised experience, that we think that this will be very beneficial to our elementary educators. So I think that might be the last slide. So do any board members have questions about this proposal?
I don't have a question. I do have someone to add to the list. We just, in District 287, we added 2 professional development days for staff as well.
Oh, okay.
And that was across the district, all staff.
When did they add those? For what months or?
I think we just had one in November, and I think the second one is coming up
Okay,
in December, maybe beginning of January.
yeah.
Just wanted to add that to your list. of
Yeah,
school
it's come up
districts.
as a topic for our AMSD superintendent conversation, so I know some districts have already made the decision and they're, working with their boards, and others are continuing to have those conversations. It's all about identifying opportune times for this.
My only concern, which you've addressed, is whether or not we'd still meet the minimum instructional minutes. And I'm glad to hear that you got the calculator out and did the math on that, so.
Nick and Pam.
Oh. Oh, then it involves spreadsheets.
Yes.
All right. So I'm good with it.
Any other board member comments or questions on this proposal? So this will appear on consent at the meeting that starts at 7 in 10 minutes. So we will move to our next agenda item, request for proposal for enterprise resource planning, as well as an update, and I'll turn it back to Dr. Mary Perry Reed.
Thank you very much, Chair Bouchard. So I do have our Director of Business Services, and in addition to managing a $100 million budget, he is also helping us think through our enterprise systems, the platforms and the systems that help us conduct business, business operations, HR, payroll, benefits, and so much more. So Director Chapanduka, would you like to talk about I think Mr. Wetter is also going to help. I see Mr. Wetter on the screen. Excellent. So is it the two of you, or do we have another presenter?
Dr. Lightfoot.
Okay, very good. Well, welcome to the two of you. And, Dr. Lightfoot. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Right?
Yes,
Wetter
Mr.
in the
Wetter has the Argyle sweater. It's a very nice sweater. And here we have Dr. Lightfoot and Director Chapanduka. So yes, if we could talk through the RFP then.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Mary Reed. Good evening again, Chair Bouchard. Good evening, respective board members. This is just a brief informational piece we are going to actually present to you. This is a shared process between our different operational functions of the district. HR being represented by Dr. Lightfoot, information technology being represented by Director John Waiter, What I'll do is we're in the process of actually soliciting for vendors to either replace or re-implement our enterprise resource planning system. As some of you may ask, what is an enterprise resource planning system? It's a system, a type of software that as an organization, we use to manage day-to-day business activities, such as accounting, payroll, risk management and compliance, human capital management, and human resources. The enterprise resource planning help us plan, budget, predict, and report on organizations' financial results. I don't know, Alice, can you share that deck? So as Alice shared the deck, I'll continue with the presentation. Just go to slide 3, please. So currently the district uses Skyward Human Resources and Finance Systems to provide our general ledger, accounts payable, accounts receivable and cash receipt, our budget preparation, not planning, a limited usage on fixed assets, limited usage on grant management, limited usage on inventory management, limited usage on purchasing, employee demographics, payroll, employee special pay, licensure, staff management, staff planning, employee leave of absence, employee self-service, just to mention a few of the components which are included with our enterprise resource planning. So currently, our system is very limited, and I'll have Director Weta kind of delve into more details as far as our current landscape and why we are moving towards a resource planning system which is different from what we are using right now, and some of the limitations. I can go to the next slide, Alice. Can you go to the next slide, Alice? Something happened. Alice is prepping up. John, do you want to take over and at least kind of give us some more details, one with the history of Skyward at Hopkins, and then some of the challenges?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Director Chapanduka. To talk about some of the challenges that we're certainly looking at from our current ERP, we're needing to understand kind of where does that data currently reside. As we look across all of our systems, right now we have data in quite a few different places with really that end up as silos of information with multiple connections within them, some of them manual connections, without really having a central collection of that data, of which then to be able to provide reporting and information out to stakeholders, whether those be our building leaders, department and district leaders, and of course, ultimately getting that information out to our community to help them understand the operations that we're working on. So really wanted to talk about just with the right now that kind of scattered look of our data. And as we take a look into that landscape specific to those systems, our current system, which is Skyward, was implemented in 2003. The current version of Skyward that we're using, they call their SMS2 product, is currently nearing actually its end of sale. Skyward actually has a new kind of second generation or next generation of their software, which we've been seeing some of the school districts in the metro area and the state starting to move to, and certainly have been met with some pretty challenging implementation hurdles. And so we've been really taking that approach to kind of wait and see what that looks like. So we know that even a quote unquote no change still means possibly adapting, still means we have to adopt a new system as we move forward. The current system runs on a legacy database without much commercial expertise available. It's a database that is not widely used in the both commercial or in school environments, which really makes our data interoperability very difficult. And any systems that we do need to bolt on, if there are not needs being met by Skyward itself and we have to attach a system to it, there's significant engineering effort to make those systems interoperate with Skyward, either pulling data from or putting data back into Skyward, the system itself. So challenges around data security and certainly continuity of operations, that ties back again to being that more of a legacy system and really struggling to have that expertise available because of some of those unique design pieces around the current implementation of Skyward. On the Hopkins side, from a systems investment piece, we really do need to take a look at how we are investing into these systems, both from a person side of that, of making sure we have the expertise around those systems and making sure what that looks like, as well as the clear ownership around the disparate data systems as we go forward and take a look at what that actually means in practice. And so from here, I believe I'm handing it off to Dr. Lightfoot to take a look at some of the impacts in our current environment in human resources.
Thank you, John. Good evening, members of the board, Superintendent Mary Perry Reed. In the HR system, I'll be brief. We're also looking to update and have a more user-defined data entry component with our HR systems, knowing that a large percentage, over 80% of our budget, is really in the people area. We need also a more robust system that has more capability than was originally crafted in the early 2000s. And there are new products on the market which increase our capacity to deliver our systems in more effective ways. So we hope that the RFP process will allow us to see that, look at the cost, weigh the cost and benefit of what we're looking to achieve, and that's part of our goal, as you can see through part of the data points that are contained in the slide.
On the financial side, again, is alluded to what Director Weta and Dr. Lightfoot said. We are also looking at enhancing our operational effectiveness. Our current system does not give us enough capability and a robust platform for reporting, which is a great challenge for the district across our different stakeholders. We are also looking at a system which will reduce risk through improved data integrity and financial controls. We are also looking at a system which lowers management and operational costs through uniform and integrated systems. Right now, we have so many different systems which are not talking to each other, and part of it becomes a manual process, and it's definitely risk for the district. And this is actually something which is happening across our different landscapes in our system, as well as other surrounding school districts. So it's not just us who are looking at this. Other school districts who are actually on the same platform are also either looking at something different, or just like Director Weta said, those who have jumped onto the newer product of Skyward have faced challenges, and some of the challenges have been really very risky to the systems. And we're trying to be very careful, walking a fine line on that. John, do you want to speak on the last slide?
Yeah, and I'll very quickly highlight just where we're looking to build toward with the new ERP system is really making sure that we can get all of our main systems applications into one area where we have better oversight around that data, those governance pieces built into what that looks like. And then that data really moving into a data warehouse, an operational store for that data, so that data can live together, so that our systems analysts and our data team can have easier, more robust access to all of those data points necessary within that data warehouse. And that's where that kind of concept of a data mart lives there, is taking that data, having it available to then move it into our analytics, whether that be reports for any of our stakeholders or dashboards, and kind of delivering that information then to those final stakeholders, making sure that we have that easily available. So that is what we'd be building toward here.
Thank you, Director Weta. Thank you, Dr. Lightfoot, and we'll take any questions from the board.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions. Really appreciate the informational presentation. We are going to end the workshop now. Board members, let's plan on being back here at 7:10. We'll begin our meeting at that point. I'd like to take some time to welcome our community members who have joined us here in the audience this evening. So see you back at the table at 7:10. Thank you. Just double checking last call for public comment cards. Chris, could you bring it to me?
Yeah, Cameron isn't going to make it very long.
Guess not. This meeting of the Hopkins School Board is called to order at 7:12 p.m. Our first agenda item is open agenda. This is typically the time when we would take public comment via voicemail or in person. I have received one public comment card for this evening. It is for an item not on the agenda, and so that public comment period comes at the end of the meeting. I do have an open agenda item myself. I'd like to recognize our two outgoing board members, Fartun Ahmed and John Kuhl. Fartun just welcomed a new baby and is unable to be here tonight, but I wanted to recognize her as a caring connector during her time on the board. She has brought more parents and caregivers into the engagement sessions and decision-making processes of the board, especially community members who had previously not been a part of this work. I'd also like to recognize John Kuhl. It feels like much longer than a year that John has been with us on the board, and I mean that in a good way, John. He is a thoughtful, quick study. He prepared for and jumped into board service during an incredibly challenging time for our district and public education nationally. And he helped us navigate these complex dynamics through a passion for community engagement and policy work. John and Fartun, you have both shaped the history of Hopkins schools, and your service has propelled us into a more equitable, just, and innovative future. On behalf of the board and our community, thank you for your service. I invited Director Kuhl to give some comments.
Yeah, I'll make this very, very, very brief. Over the last year, it's really been a life-changing experience for me in a lot of ways. It's truly been an honor to be a part of this board, this group, and have the opportunity to work with the amazing district leadership and so many talented people that I've had an opportunity to meet. It's funny, the initial push for me to get involved with the school board was based on a strong encouragement from my children. My daughter was very clear with me, that is, if I saw a concern, I needed to step up and be part of the solution, or I needed to shut up. So, fast forwarding to today, I definitely wanted to remind our community that there are a lot of opportunities within the district to get involved, including a lot of committees that are through the school board, of course, but there's also PTO and so many other ways to get involved. And I think it's a very important time for all of us to see all of the events that are going on in this world and realize the more involved we can be with our children's education, the better. I've learned so much this year about the new pandemic that we are experiencing that is in the way of mental health and community wellness. So I am working on ways to stay involved with the district and this community. My family and I are going to start donating financially to the district to specifically be earmarked for mental health funding. But additionally, I'm going to be beginning a master's in social work program next fall. And I really do look forward to be able to use that in the future to benefit the district and our community. So thank you very much for allowing me to be involved.
Thank you so much, John. Next, we'll move on to our reports. We don't have any of our wonderful student board representatives here with us in the room physically, but I wanted to check on the Google Meet to see if you're there. I can't see all of the members of the Google Meet at once. So student board reps, if you're there, let me know. They are clearly very busy, finishing out their work before break here. So with that, I'll pass it to Dr. Mary Peary-Reed for the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Chair Bouchard. So just a quick slide deck here. Welcome and good evening to our community members, colleagues. Good evening, board members. There are so many things to celebrate in Hopkins Public Schools. We have vibrant early learning classrooms in Harley Hopkins. We have very active and actively engaged classrooms in 6 elementary schools, our junior highs, and our high school. Teachers are focused and working in very meaningful and impactful ways with our students who we are day by day training to be scholars. So there's lots of things to celebrate. I know it's a challenging week, the week before any kind of a break where students have to transition to being at home for a longer period of time. You know, for some students, it's something to really look forward to. I'm hoping that this is the sentiment that most of our students are facing during this time. For others of our students, it can be stressful. We have students and family members who have lost loved ones. We have students who are in home environments or predicaments that feel challenging or feel unsafe. And so because of all of this and the mixture of all of this, it can be a trying time for our schools. So I'm really thankful for our educators and our leaders and staff who just literally minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, provide the stability and the assurance and the meaningful relationships for our students as we transition in and out of school. So 3 days left, and I know our staff really need, our school staff really need a break, and I'm hoping that they will take that break. So a couple of district highlights, 2 amazing people to celebrate at our high school staff meeting. Just can't remember when it was, maybe last Friday, I can't remember, but we recognized Jesse Thurl, who is in our business department. He was recently named the 2021 Minnesota Marketing, Business, Information Technology Educator, Secondary Teacher of the Year by the Minnesota Business Educators Organization. And Jesse is not only a really wonderful individual, but he's super forward-thinking in his instruction and lesson design. So we're grateful for Jesse and all of the contributions that he's made in students' lives and in that department. Also want to recognize the Loft Literary Center's Mirrors and Windows Fellow, Keenan Jones, who is a member of our Hopkins Innovation Design Department. And Mr. Jones will receive mentoring from writers who work at the Loft to hone his skills in authoring picture books and young adult literature, one of his passions. So congratulations to these 2 educators, these 2 esteemed educators for these really cool recognitions. Also our Scholar Spotlight for this evening. So these are students from our outdoor immersion program at Eisenhower. And, Abby and Lisa are very good about tweeting scholars' learning and all of the ahas and all of the experience all of the experiences that they're having in their outdoor environment. And I really loved this one, where students ranked the snow's buildability as the day before the storm was low, and then they tried it again on Friday, and the snow was ideal. And their theory was that warmer temperatures and sunshine started melting the snow, making it wet and stickier. So I love to see these pictures of our littlest learners really enjoying learning in the natural environment. And kudos to Abby and Lisa for everything they've done to put Hopkins on the outdoor immersion map. And for our department spotlight, last week at our school board workshop and meeting, board members and community members listening in were able to listen to a very thorough report from the firm that helps us conduct our audit. And we did have a very clean audit, and honestly, it requires hours and hours and hours of time by the business professionals in our business services department. So I just wanted to take a moment to recognize this team led by our Director of Business Services, Truro Chapanduka. This is a really amazing and devoted team. They care about the fiscal health of our organization, and they do so much to make sure that our business processes and our audits are clean and tight. So thanks to that team. And then we always end our superintendent report with a focus on one of our 6 system goals. And so I wanted to focus this evening on the work around our culture system goal. So as a district, we will increase wellness by building a workplace culture that is safe and caring. We will experience wholeness by increasing trust, sharing power, and ensuring people are of equal worth, which is very different from an organization that values hierarchy and relies on, one group of people to tell another group of people what to do. And I know that still exists in our organization. It will take time to flatten out our organization and to practice the processes and the mechanisms that allow every voice to be heard, every voice to be at the table. So we really are doing work in that space. And an example of this is we have quarterly meetings with all of the union representatives and leaders from our 9 bargaining units. So yesterday we had our second quarterly meeting. And it's a difficult discussion when we're focusing on the question, well, what is keeping you up at night in terms of our organizational culture or systems or practices? There's a lot to say around things that we need to improve. But also there's a lot to share when we talk about progress that we're making in terms of our culture and systems. So I'm grateful for those conversations so that we can understand what we're doing well as an organization and truly what we need to improve, because we do want to create a space and a place in Hopkins where every employee feels like a valued member of a cohesive team. So that's the report for this evening, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Mary Perry Reed. Any comments or questions from my board colleagues? With that, I would look for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, I look for a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, we'll move to the treasurer's report with Treasurer Adams.
Thank you, Chair Bouchard. Not a whole lot to report on in this 1 week since our last meeting, but expenses of note this time include $10,320 for an outdoor classroom tent. I'm not sure which school is receiving this, but I noticed that last year there was one at Alice Smith that was used for outdoor instruction for orchestra. So, but this might be going to one of our schools where they have an outdoor classroom curriculum. There were thousands of dollars dispensed to booster clubs for working at concession stands during athletic events. And I'm imagining most of those are football and basketball games. And I know that having been the head of a booster club once upon a time, that's a major source of income for booster clubs. $2,408 for a psychologist for non-public schools. A lot of people don't realize that public schools in Minnesota by law are required to provide medical and counseling services to private schools within our district. And obviously the need this year is so great that we cannot, with our own staff, do it. So we've been engaging the services of a supplemental psychologist for students in those non-public schools. And then sign of the times, a deposit for catering for the 2022 prom. So we're moving into the next season. So with that, I move that we approve total disbursements in the amount of $858,755.83 for the period November 30th, 2021 through December 7th, 2021.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second?
I have a motion and a second to approve the treasurer's report. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, we'll move into new business. Our wonderful Legislative Action Coalition members have been hard at work creating this year's platform. And so I'd like to turn it over to Director Adams to introduce this agenda item.
All right, thank you, Chair Bouchard. I'd like to call up my co-chair on the LAC, Michelle Pasco, to join us at the table here and provide a little introduction to our presentation tonight about what we're focusing on for our legislative agenda for 2021.
Well, Steve, do you want to start with where your slide deck with where we started, where the LAC kind of what we're all about, and then
Sure.
talk about the beginning of 2022's platform?
All right, that'd be great. Alyssa,
Should we go join Michelle? Steve?
That would be nice.
well, I'd
I'll
like
come
to be.
join you.
Okay. I've got everything all set up here.
Thank you.
I like this better. Now I don't have to
Swivel.
crane my neck.
All right. So, Alyssa, could you bring up the slide deck?
Thanks, Elise.
You mean Elise?
Elise, I'm sorry. That's correct.
Well, I could start reading while we're waiting.
Well, why don't we do the overview first? I'll vamp here for a little bit. It's going to be an interesting year at the legislature, and there's been some leadership changes at the legislature, which I hope to encapsulate here in my presentation. But we've got a new majority leader in the Senate who is kind of an unknown quantity to me. I hope he's not to everybody else in the leadership roles at MSBA and AMSD. But it's Jeremy Miller from Winona. I've never met the gentleman. I don't know what his particular issues are, but I've checked out his website and his Facebook page to try and get a feel for it. So I don't know if I mentioned he's from Winona and rather young. Wow, cool.
Wow, I think we've like transported into another realm.
I'm pretty sure that's that.
Well, on another note, it's not a funding year, although
Right.
there is technically, supposedly, a surplus, which we will, of course, lobby for. Ha, ha, ha. But it is a policy year, so we're focusing on policies we hope to tweak, adjust
Right.
through our 12 legislators that represent our district, which is in Steve's slide deck.
And even though it's not a funding year, let's be honest, every year at the legislature is a funding year. And especially this year when we've got a $7 billion surplus, jockeying has already begun over what to do with that surplus. There's certain individuals in the legislature who would just like to give it all back to taxpayers rather than address some of the societal needs we've got. So that will be an issue that we'll have to deal with. But we'll have some help from our cohorts at AMSD and at MSBA. So,
Well,
I'll tell you, why don't you start?
I'll just start. Okay, so the preamble to our specifics that we're going to be addressing is this. We learned a lot during 2021. New words crept into our collective vocabulary: pandemic, unprecedented, personal protective equipment, distance learning. New ways of interacting with friends, neighbors, and businesses became routine: social distancing, self-quarantine, essential workers. Uncertainty became normal. Minnesotans turned to community institutions, including schools, for models of resilience as we all pivoted multiple times and persevered. Schools stepped up to support not only students, but families as well. We learned a lot during 2021. We discovered that we could feed our students and families with free, nutritious meals. We learned that we could teach our scholars while they remained out of their classrooms. We were reminded that public schools are the cornerstone of our communities. Moving forward into 2022, Hopkins Public Schools seeks to strengthen and simplify the strategies that worked best during 2021. We ask the Governor's Office and the Minnesota Legislature to partner with us to accelerate innovation and expand services for our scholars and their families. So, should we just
Our
get started?
priorities for 2022 include the following: fully fund public school nutrition programs, so all Minnesota families have equitable access to healthy meals, contributing to overall community health and food security.
Secondly, we would like to eliminate the compensatory funding qualification that's currently based on free and reduced lunch applications and move towards community eligibility for essential services. Shannon alluded to that earlier, that right now the way that compensatory funding is determined is by the number of parents in a district that apply for free and reduced meals. And the sad fact is that not all of those qualifying parents do that. It's estimated that somewhere around 10% of the people who qualify do not make the application. And right now, in the 2021 school year, 32.2% of students, of families in the state of Minnesota qualified for free and reduced meals. If you were to add another 10% to that, That's probably the truer picture of the need that's out there. And to base compensatory funding for school districts on that rather flawed fact is not appropriate in our opinion. So we're looking for a different method to address that, and it has been brought up in the past, especially with the school finance working group that met a few years ago. So that's one thing that we're going to continue to lobby for.
We would like the legislature to support your investment in Reimagine Minnesota, your meaning the states. They've already invested in of how to move forward. So support your investment in Reimagine Minnesota to ensure that public education remains, as written in our Constitution, a paramount duty of this state. It's already work underway. It's been underway for a few years, and there are 9 platforms to Reimagine Minnesota, and the work's been done about what needs to happen, how do we move forward, and so let's do it. What are we waiting for? Let's invest in it.
In addition, we'd like the legislature to empower locally elected school boards to do the job they were elected to do, which is to renew existing operating referenda, set school calendars, allow flexible and innovative spending priorities. We'll get to that referenda issue later, but we just had that discussion tonight here at the table about school calendars. Well, we've got a mandate that we've got to have so many hours of instruction, and the definition of instruction is very narrow, and it's got to have a licensed teacher, and it's got to be in a physical place. So how do you do education in the 21st century when you're living with those constraints? So we'd like to see more support given to school boards, more autonomy to make those decisions. That's me. Okay. In addition, we want to provide families with secure and sustainable early education funding for Pathways 1 and 2 early learning scholarships, School Readiness Plus, and voluntary pre-K. I'm an acolyte of Art Rolnick, who used to serve on the Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank Board, and he's done the calculation as to what the payback is on early learning investment, and it's about 17 to 1. So for every investment that you put into early childhood education, you get about 17 times back over the life of that child. And as he said, that would be a no-brainer in the financial investment world. So we're asking the legislature to put more priority on that.
Direct the Minnesota Department of Education to update and reform outdated and cumbersome requirements for scholars and teachers, including mandated seat time requirements and restrictive teacher licensing procedures. So this kind of overlaps some of the earlier ones we've already said in a little more direct way. It's the seat time that Steve referred to, but also licensing, trying to get qualified educators in the classroom, and not make it so restrictive and so hard to do so. And that's started, but we want to keep going with it. We want to make sure it continues, and that we can get qualified people in the classrooms.
Expand and stabilize mental health supports and services by increasing and stabilizing funding, resources, and access.
And finally, stabilize education funding and link the basic formula to inflation to provide a consistent funding stream that allows school districts to engage in long-range planning. The gap between what would have been normal with inflationary influences and what we actually receive from the legislature has been growing ever since 2003. And right now, it's about, I think it's around $600 per student more we should have received if inflation were taken into account with the funding formula. And also, we're looking for approval to do school board renewals of operating referenda levies. It's interesting that school districts are the only taxing authority in the state of Minnesota that are required to hold a referendum to set levies. We don't do that every year. We've got some leeway, but about every 3 or 4 years, we're having to renew a referendum, renew a levy that was previously approved in a referendum. And if you look at what the referendum renewal rates have been, going back to 2014, it's been 100%. So there have been 119 referendums conducted in the state of Minnesota since 2014 that all got approved. Now, why do we go through this every year? The most recent year was we had 15 of 15 levies approved. And it's an unnecessary expense. It's unnecessary effort. And the majority of Minnesotans support having school boards do that approval process. Morris Leatherman Company has done several surveys, and I think the rate was something like 70% of Minnesotans, and that's both urban and rural, support giving school boards the authority to renew referendums. So, operating referenda. So we're asking for the state legislature to make that a priority again this year. So that is our presentation.
Thank you very much.
So we'll be presenting this to all our legislators. We're inviting them to a virtual breakfast, and we will deliver actual breakfast from Royal Cuisine to their homes the day before. We did it last year, and it got very warmly received. So we'll be presenting this platform with much more detail. Each of these planks will have more, research and all the data behind it that we're alluding to here. So.
And all of you are invited. So
Absolutely.
That's going to be on January 21st. Usually starts at 8 o'clock because our legislators don't like to get up too early. So.
Well, it's on a Friday, right?
Yeah, right.
So they have the day off in theory.
Fridays are usually a day that legislators don't have committed meetings, so they can spend time in their district. So that's why we intend to do that. So we're open to questions. Anyone have a question for us or a particular thing that you think we should prioritize this year?
Well, as I was reading over the platform in preparation for this meeting, I was just really impressed by the framing. I like this framing of what we learned during 2021. And of course, a lot of the things we learned were just like reinforcing what we already knew to be true. And so kind of framing it in terms of lifelong learning, and then also like, we learned a lot last year, now we need to act on that learning, I think is really effective. And will be useful for drawing in our representatives and also for drawing in our community members to join us in advocating for these priorities. You came to the board earlier this year to ask for our input, and I see all of it reflected here. And I just appreciate the really holistic and careful work that LAC does to craft a platform that's high level enough that we can include all of these specific asks underneath, as Michelle was saying, that the presentation to our legislators will be more fleshed out than this. But this high level platform, really signals our priorities and then provides entry points for our community members to get involved. So just a note of gratitude from me.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other comments or questions from our board colleagues? Dr. Mary Perry Reed has one.
Thank you very much for this thoughtful platform. I'm looking at the third one from the bottom, direct the Minnesota Department of Education to update and reform outdated and cumbersome requirements. I'm thinking of it as maybe a broader area that allows us to innovate and be creative with how we support teachers and students. I'm thinking primarily about an ongoing staffing shortage and what are the policy barriers that prevent us from forging strong partnerships with community organizations, with parent organizations, with private individuals who either want to, provide funding, who want to volunteer in our schools, who want to partner with teachers in either, helping with content and lesson design, helping with tutoring, right? We need to be really creative with what our staffing structures look like, what our adult to student ratios look like as we continue into a future that might, where we might continue to experience shortages in, across all kinds of positions and roles. So I'm just looking for the opportunities in the policy space that allow us to be flexible and creative,
Right.
so that our students have enough adults who support them and our teachers have enough creative thought partners so that they're not continuing to shoulder this work alone or in the same ways that, we've always done it.
Yeah, I think that's an important piece to include in this position paper. At the MSBA Delegate Assembly, someone presented a resolution to expand the restriction that's in state statute around how many hours a school board member can work in the district in which they serve, given all the staff shortages that we have. And I don't think that people are as aware as they could be about all the restrictions that schools have to operate under around staffing and who can be in the building and who can't. And a lot of that isn't up to us. It's legislated and or part of different agencies' policies. So I think that's a very important piece.
Mm-hmm.
And even just the basic idea of someone moving from state to state and licensure being, traveling with them, and, oh, no, you're from that state, you can't teach in Minnesota. So, there's many, many components to this that, yes, we intend to address.
So Superintendent Mary Perry Reed, maybe you could present that plank at the legislative breakfast?
Oh, sure.
All right. We'll keep that in mind.
Well, thank you for your thoughtful work. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Do we need a motion to approve?
We do. Any further comments, questions? Okay. With that, I would look for a motion that the board adopt the LAC state legislative platform for 2022.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Up the LAC legislative platform. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Next, we'll move on to our board member reports. And we got to give Steve a little time to get back because I know he has one.
Somebody else kick it off.
Chair Bouchard, I can go just quickly. I wanted to announce that District 287 has completed their candidate search for superintendent. The top choice for the incoming superintendent is Marcy Dowd. She is currently serving as the assistant superintendent Superintendent of Special Services in the St. Paul Public Schools. You can watch the interviews that were done on the top 3 candidates at the District 287 website. And the contract will officially begin on July 1st, 2022. But the school board is entering into negotiations, and where we will have an opportunity to discuss transition options. The current superintendent was very generous in the time she gave the board to prepare for her departure, as well as is staying on to facilitate and oversee a transition to a new superintendent, which we are really grateful for. And also excited about this candidate and an opportunity to see what she will bring to District 287.
Thank you so much for the update and for being part of that process. I know that it was very involved, as a superintendent search and interview process should be. And just appreciate you representing us and our board's values in that process. Thank you.
Chair Bouchard,
Yes,
I brought something for show and tell.
great.
I subscribe to Bloomberg Business Week, and I finally got around to reading last week's issue. And it's, the cover story is on the 50 people and ideas that define 2021. I was reading through it, and all of a sudden I noticed there's a Hopkins alum.
Oh my gosh, oh my gosh.
Oh,
Can we get that on camera?
Close up on Paige.
But basically, because of her pioneering deal that she put together to sponsor certain athletic products and be able to reap the benefits of the NCAA's new ruling on student athletes being able to do that. So that's all I got.
That was exciting. Thank you. Other board member reports? This is our last board meeting of the calendar year, so I just wanted to end by saying thank you to our staff. Every person I know who works in education has said that this is the most difficult year of their careers thus far. And teaching at a community college, I can say this is true for me as well. The compounding impacts of COVID, the unmet mental and physical health needs, systemic racism, and economic and gender-based oppression in our communities can feel overwhelming. And they can feel especially overwhelming for the caring adults who show up every day to empower our next generation. You are remarkable. I also want to thank our scholars who are navigating incredibly complex circumstances socially, emotionally, intellectually, and in terms of our physical environments. Yet you continue to show up and figure out how to be in relationship with one another, to discover your interests and passions, and you collaborate and lead in ways that are both seen and unseen. You are also remarkable. About a week ago, a renowned author and poverty abolitionist, someone I'm very proud to call my mentor, Julia Dinsmore, wrote some powerful thoughts on social media. As a lifelong student and teacher of literature, I firmly believe that creative writing belongs everywhere, including in boardrooms. And as I reflect on what's happening across the globe and some of these ripple effects in our community, her words really struck a chord with me, and I thought I would just offer them to you tonight as we move into our winter break period of rest and renewal. From Julia Dinsmore. The social fabric everywhere around me is being stretched thin. Threads are fraying and snapping in some places. People and institutions are melting down. Gather the most possible healthy circle of support around you and your loved ones. Commit and recommit your best higher selves to one another. Don't mince your words, yet let them be steeped in a spirit of compassion. Hollow out space for grace to be alive in all her hues. We are living in the chaos of social destruction. There are forces underfoot that are like the shifting of tectonic plates. You are not alone in feeling the shaking ground. Navigate wisely all comings, goings, sayings, and doings. Thank you, Julia. Next, we'll move into our second public comment period for items not on the agenda. Chris Carr, I'll invite you to the table. Just read a reminder of our protocol for public comments. So you'll speak for 3 minutes. A reminder that members of the school board do not respond directly to public comments that are made at this meeting, but a district representative may follow up with you after the meeting. If you have written comments, it doesn't look like you do, but if you did, the board would appreciate having a copy. And a reminder that personal attacks by anyone addressing the school board will not be tolerated. Persistence in such remarks by an individual or otherwise disruptive behavior shall terminate that person's privilege to address the school board. Give me 1 moment to get my timer up here.
You're going to need it. No, I'm kidding.
And whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Bouchard, Superintendent Mary Reed, and all board members. I appreciate it. My name is Chris Carr. I work in the security industry, and for the better part of 20 years have been in downtown Minneapolis working with public safety partners there, social outreach organizations, and from my position in the private security industry. I'm also a parent of students at elementary, junior high, and high school levels this year, and the only year it will be that way. And I'm a Hopkins grad of 1997 with Chair Bouchard, as a matter of fact. I also have 20 years of working with adolescents of all races, ethnic backgrounds, country of origin, orientation, gender identity, and socioeconomic status. Within the last several weeks, as the conversations have been happening within these meetings and within the community around safety and security, it is a complex topic. I've listened to the workshop presentation today on holistic safety. I like the word holistic. I think that's a very applicable term. One of the things I encourage our community as a broader communication is to not allow the conversation on safety and security to devolve into politicized finger pointing or unproductive blame games that contain within them tacit socioeconomic prejudice. There are solutions within the security and public safety world within schools that establish inclusive and equitable strategies that take into account whole persons, deconstruct implicit and racial and ethnic bias for scholars, faculty, staff, family, and community members, that take into account root cause considerations, as well as holding clear and definitive standards and accountability for actions and behaviors within the learning environments that keep people safe. It will take more people, effort, time, and money. The privilege of choice is something that people have until they don't. As someone who has worked in the downtown Minneapolis, people make decisions about what they're going to prepare for and what they're going to react to. The environment that we look at when we think about these things, we can choose right now as parents and community members to choose whether or not the inconvenience or focus and effort on safety and security is worth it. We can do that until we are reacting to the next incident that results in a student or staff member harmed. And then that choice gets taken away, and we are stuck with the reaction. Reactively, it is easy to take ineffective and emotional knee-jerk decisions, putting all our eggs in one proverbial basket, whether it's an SRO program or otherwise, and the default to overloading individual positions and imbalanced when it comes to counselors or blaming others, whatever community that represents. We've talked a lot tonight about response and drills. I think those are important elements
We
of
are at
a
3 minutes.
program. Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
And I see that you do have notes, and so if you would perhaps email those to me
I will be happy to.
so that we could see those. That would be really helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Carr.
Thank you.
With that, I'd look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. Any discussion? There will be one day. Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Motion carries. This meeting of the Hopkins School Board is adjourned at 8:01 PM.